And Michael and I have talked about this because I've done a couple of shows on Laurel Canyon, and they all hung out in Laurel Canyon. They weren't a band together, but everybody in Laurel Canyon played together. Now there was the Monkees, the Doors, Frank Zappa, Alice Cooper, Crosby, Stills, Nash, and Young, members of the Eagles. I mean, the list is just insane. It just goes on and on. A virtual who's who in late 60s, early 70s rock. Okay, they all played together. They all had jam sessions. They all partied together. It was pretty wild up in Laurel Canyon. And so there was 2 or 3 different people up there that claimed credit for putting Crosby, Stills, and Nash together as a band, that was encouraging them. Several people were claiming that, well, I was the one that put them together, And do you remember the story on that at all, Michael?
I think it gets down to either Mama Cass introduced them or Joni Mitchell, and the evidence favors Joni Mitchell. It was at her house.
Favors Joni Mitchell, right?
Yeah, it was at her house, and it was at a dinner party there. So, as far as I can tell, I think Cass even laid claim to it. That may have given that story some.
You're right. No. Cass
gravitas, I should say.
Cass did claim because she had put them together a few times at her house. Playing together.
Right.
So,
but there's the members of the band tend to remember that it was at Joni Mitchell's house, and whenever. Yeah. Here's the thing, and this doesn't take anything away from Mama Cass whatsoever, but because she was a magic all unto herself. But there's something that happened with Joni Mitchell and these guys, and really anybody that touched her life and everything. I almost, my favorite Crosby, Stills, Nash song would be Guinevere, written by Crosby. And I every time I hear that song, I almost think of Joni Mitchell.
I see.
I'll tell you, when I first heard that song as a teenager, that was the perfect woman in me. Guinevere had golden hair. Guinevere had green eyes. Guinevere drew pentagrams like yours, lady like yours. I wanted to meet this woman. I think Joni Mitchell was kind of that woman for a lot. Remember, we talked about even Eric Clapton sat at her feet because he was fascinated by her alternative tunings, right?
Right.
And
that's right.
Of course, she was very involved with Crosby, Stills, and Nash right from the beginning.
Right.
Didn't she write Woodstock?
I can look that up. I
I thought she wrote the song Woodstock, and
she might have.
And that's one of their big hits, No,
it was a huge hit.
Yeah. I tend to like, and this does not cut down Deja Vu. Deja Vu is a masterpiece also. All right. And it's wonderful. But I do tend to. I have a preference for CS&N over CS&Y, and that would be interesting to hear from the Peanut Gallery tonight, because there are kind of 2 incarnations here, and I wonder, it's going to be hard to not vote for CS&Y. Especially with Deja Vu as an offering and a wonderful live album that went along with that. And of course, because as a single artist, at first, Stephen Stills and Neil Young were tied as a single artist, but Neil Young kept doing it longer. And Stephen Stills kind of, he was gaining weight, he was losing hearing, he's a rich Hollywood guy, he just, I guess, lost interest in staying hungry.
Okay, so James Watson and Angela both confirmed that Joni Mitchell wrote Woodstock, Michael, and I confirmed it looking into the album cover. But James brought up the story about this cover
Yeah.
Okay.
It was there and then it wasn't, right? Is that what you're talking about? They realized that if you look at the cover, it's not in the order of their names. It's not Crosby, Stills, and Nash. And so they went back to the house to reshoot the cover, but the house had been torn down by that time.
Right.
And so they were stuck with the cover. But I love that cover. Isn't that just such a great cover?
And that's a great story too.
Yeah.
No, it is a great cover, you know.
That house was ready to be torn down that moment. Take a look at that. You know, the T's were crossed, the I's were dotted, the house was going down. But these hippie, you know, musician artists didn't care. They didn't know that, you know, this is good backdrop, you know? And it's just the perfect cover for those songs because it's like, you know, Laurel Canyon, West Coast hippiedom meets Guinevere, Wooden Ships. Oh, that song there. That's a movie to be made.
Oh,
you
yeah.
know, Wooden Ships.
I love that song.
Wooden ships, yeah.
Oh, the story behind it. You know, they're on these long wooden ships after a nuclear war, but they have to be on wooden ships because everything is radioactive. And they're getting sick and they're search for good food and everything. They are the last survivors. It's post-apocalyptic. And another one by David Crosby.
This is a really interesting song here by Eric Schultz. All of Crosby, Stills, Nash were on Neil Young's classic Harvest, but not necessarily three on the same song at once. But every one of them played on songs on Harvest. I think that's pretty cool.
I wasn't aware of that. I think that's
I was not aware. Eric, thank you.
Yeah. That to me, if you're gonna name the best Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young solo album of all time, it's Harvest to me, hands down. He hit platinum on that album, and you know, it's interesting, Royce. I've told the tale how I was being naughty in California and out of control. So my mom said, "Right, off you go. You go live with your grandmother." So I was moved across the nation to North Carolina, which was where I was born. 17 years old, all my ego stripped, you know, by Mama Bear, who knew how to handle a renegade son, and and the only place you could buy albums in this small town, Waynesville, North Carolina. Went to Tuscola High School there in my junior year. Was a small drugstore. And, you know, and like one on those wire racks, much like a comic book rack back in the days, were the albums. And I bought 3 albums that day. I bought Paranoid, Killer by Alice Cooper, and Harvest. Now think about Alice Cooper, Paranoid, all right, and Harvest.
Yeah.
You know, and
that's
Harvest,
a real diverse.
But the whole time I was in North Carolina, see, I got into Killer heavy at first, and then it was Harvest that I was listening to. But I was also in a more rural setting than I was used to being in, you know, just a couple of miles out of San Francisco. So where you are when you hear this music can often, you know, weave a spell over you, you know?
And not only just where you were when you heard it, but who you were with.
Sure.
Right.
All contributes, you know.
Well, back when I was 17, or one summer 16, the other 17, I got to spend it with my grandfather up in a cabin in Stokes Bay, Ontario. And one of the CDs I remember playing all the time was Neil Young's Harvest and Rod Stewart's Gasoline Alley.
Oh, wow.
Oh, yeah.
And I got my grandfather, who wasn't really into much rock and roll, you know, he hadn't been converted yet, even by the early 90s. Okay. But he got into the Neil Young, real good, that CD. And the Rod Stewart one, but he was a little more open to Neil Young than Rod Stewart.
What do you guys think about this song, Our House, as a song? I can't stand that song.
I actually like it. And it had to do with David Crosby and the girl the woman he was dating in Laurel.
Nash.
Yeah.
It was Nash.
Yeah,
it was Nash.
Yeah.
Oh, I thought it was Crosby. Okay.
No, it was Nash.
Okay. Thank you.
What Nash wrote that song at that store we were talking about after a very lovely afternoon, and brought it home. And once you know the story, because, Melissa, when that song came out, God, and Teach Your Children, I thought, oh, this is corny, and I've grown to love them over the decades. But what turned me on about that song was he was talking about just a simple, almost synchronetic feeling between the two of them. And he was just thoroughly in love, getting flowers for her. And it was so freaking honest. And when you listen to the song like that, it takes on, for me anyway, it took on a grander statement, because this was true love.
Their second tour produced the double live album, Four-Way Street in 1971.
Right, Four-Way Street, yeah.
There was a lot of arguing going on between Young and Taylor, which resulted in Taylor being replaced by John Barbata, and tensions with Stills also. At the end of the tour, they disbanded. The group reunited several times, sometimes with Young, and released 8 studio albums and 4 live albums. Yeah, at that point, Young would kind of come and go. He wouldn't be on all their albums,
Well, that was Young even with Buffalo Springfield. He wanted equal status, but he also wanted an out, and it goes with his personality. He's like Paul Simon would be at times in his career. He'd get a bug up his ass, and he'd have to explore it all the way through. And even if Crosby, Stills, and Nash got in the way, it wasn't through hatred so much as, first of all, he's kind of full of himself. He's got an ego, and he knows he's when he's on, he's on. Half of what he says these days is nonsense, but he's just one of those guys that can't be nailed down.
Well, Michael, that's interesting you said that, because there was a comment earlier that was addressing that. When Neil Young joined, someone said they were surprised that Neil Young didn't try to rename the band Young, then Crosby, Stills, Nash.
Yeah. It was, part of him, I always get, because I am a major Neil Young fan. I like I said, I think he's got the best. He's got the best total separate discography than all of them. And Stephen Stills was up there with him for a while, but we talked about that. But over the years, he's got a stronger discography, and I think his always backing off from projects and showing kind of almost a coldness to people that you would think he wouldn't show is him doubting himself, but his need to move on is the true artist in him, and he's just one of those anomalies in rock.